Because he played games seriously and therefore knew grace comes hard, rises through the cheap in us, the petty, the entire history of our defeats. He looked for grace in his opponents, found a few friends that way, and so many others he could never drink with, talk to. He learned early never to let up, never to give a weaker opponent a gift, because so many times he'd been that person and knew the humiliation in it, being pandered to, a bone for the sad dog. And because he remembered those times after a loss, when he'd failed at grace, stole from the victor the pleasures of pure victory by speaking about a small injury or the cold he wasn't quite over. He loved those opponents who'd shake hands and give credit, save their true and bitter stories for their lovers later, when all such lamentations are comic, the sincere if-onlys of grown men in short pants. Oh, there were people who thought all of it so childish. What to say to them? How to agree ever about dignity and fairness? One more of these. This is in 3 parts, Losing Steps. 1. It's probably a Sunday morning in a pickup game, and it's clear you've begun to leave fewer people behind. Your fakes are as good as ever, but when you move, it's like the Southern Pacific the first time a car kept up with it. Your opponent at your hip, with you all the way to the rim. 5 years earlier, he'd have been part of the air that stayed behind you in your ascendance. On the sidelines, they're saying, he's lost a step. 2. In a few more years, it's adult night in a gymnasium streaked with the abrupt scuff marks of high schoolers, and another step leaves you like a wire burned out in a radio. You're playing defense, someone jukes right, goes left, and you're not fooled, but he's past you anyway, dust in your eyes, a few more points against you. 3. Suddenly you're 50. If you know anything about steps, you're playing chess with an old complicated friend. But you're walking to a schoolyard where kids are playing full court, telling yourself the value of experience, a worn-down basketball under your arm, your legs hanging from your waist like misplaced sloths in a country known for its cheetahs and its sunsets. Now, a couple from the Southern Review. Not yet out yet, I just read them in galleys. Even the awful. I often at readings ask the audience, what's the most misused and overused word of your generation? And they usually come up with it fairly fast. It's awesome. And I remind them that few of us have ever experienced anything like awe, and if we have, it has made us silent. Even the awful. Ecstasy, like awe, hardly ever occurred, though when it did, it provided its own definition. Still, I'd prefer an occasional bout of joy, which I could recover from in a day or so, and maybe even speak about, whereas ecstasy, that one time, made me silent, and awe was something like Lazarus rising from the dead and the populace uttering the equivalent of holy shit, then falling to their knees in bewilderment. A nice day was nice too, as was a beautiful disappointment, like fog obscuring a sunrise. I'd set my alarm to see. I'd even settle for an evening of small talk and inappropriate snorts and guffaws with friends I was sure were otherwise capable of high-mindedness and hilarity. Even an awful day now and then serves to warn us what's out there, which doesn't help, because here it comes anyway. This one I realize has a similar ending to the first poem I read, but at least 30 years separate them. So I think I'm allowed. The Revolt of the Turtles. On gray, forgetful mornings like this, sea turtles would gather in the shallow waters of the Gulf to discuss issues of self-presentation and related concerns like, if there were a God, would he have a hard shell and a retractable head, and whether speed on land was of any importance to a good swimmer. They knew that tourists needed to placate their children with catchy stories and amuse themselves with various cruelties, like turning turtles over on their backs and watching their legs wriggle. So the turtles formed a committee to address, this is all initial caps, how to live among people who, among other atrocities, want to turn you into soup. The committee was also charged with wondering if God would mind a retelling of their lives, one in which sea turtles were responsible for all things right-minded and progressive, and men and women for poisoning the water. The oldest sea turtle among them knew that whoever was in control of the stories controlled all the shoulds and the should-nots. But he wasn't interested in punishment, only ways in which power could bring about fairness and decency. And when he finished speaking in the now memorable and ever-deepening waters of the Gulf, all the sea turtles began to chant, only fairness, only decency. I'll read two more, maybe. In order to be true to life, you need to let rise into daylight what you've seen on the darkest of nights, as well as those trivial sepia silhouettes of bodies moving in nearby apartments. No matter who you are, a little variety never hurts. It's possible to rethink that reddish full moon coming toward you across the bay, to change even the feel of it as it approaches. That is, if you want to be true to life, not entirely to the one you live. Don't hesitate to include the pink Cadillac that may or may not have driven by while you were eating macaroni and cheese, or those meteors that fell at sensational speeds and dissolved into nothingness. You need to remember it's likely something nameless is governing you, which is why perhaps your dreams often turn odd and grave. You're lost at sea and the sharks are pretending to be dolphins. In another dream, you're your own secret agent, gathering evidence, never quite sure if by mistake you'll turn yourself in. A man like you is always in danger of getting things wrong. No rapturous solutions in the offing. Simple cries for help, even if unanswered, are what's called for. There's a chance then you won't die feeling stupid, or say you've been granted more time and you've gone to your musky, moldy attic. What you need to understand is the mystery every family harbors. Dig deeper and deeper still. Under the photos will likely be that packet of letters tied with a black ribbon, and the sudden uprush of what you couldn't until now, ever know. Do one more. This has a epigraph from Randall Jarrell. What does a pig know about bacon? Propositions. Anyone who begins a sentence with, in all honesty, is about to tell a lie. Anyone who says, this is how I feel, had better love form more than disclosure. Same for anyone who thinks he thinks well because he had a thought. If you say you're ugly to an ugly person, no credit for honesty, which must always be a discovery, an act that qualifies as an achievement. If you persist, you're just a cruel bastard, a pig without a mirror, somebody who hasn't examined himself enough. A hesitation hints at an attempt to be honest, suggests a difficulty is present. A good sentence needs a clause or two, interruptions set off by commas, evidence of a slowing down, a rethinking. Before I asked my wife to marry me, I told her I'd never be fully honest. No one, she said, had ever said that to her. I was trying, I said, to be radically honest, but in fact had another motive. A claim without a but in it is at best only half true. In all honesty, I was asking in advance to be forgiven. Thank you.
Thank you.